Fresh meat.
Hey everyone, it's Andrew stepping in for Lance again. I haven't quite figured out why, but it's either because he's a staunch supporter of 90s films, and today's movie released in February of 2000, or I'm just contractually obligated to take charge on sequels that have Lance Henriksen in them.
What made you want to complicate my life like this?
Scream was a game changer of a film, full stop. It showed the relevancy of both the slasher genre that was on life support in the late 90s could still turn some heads, and it also showed that the late great Wes Craven still had some nightmares to share with us. Much like his Mount Rushmore contemporaries Tobe Hooper and John Carpenter, not all of Craven's films were all-time classics, and just a year before Scream released, he had a critical and commercial bomb, Vampire in Brooklyn. Now Scream came out hot. It was a smash hit with $173 million at the box office, which was the highest grossing slasher film of all time until 2018's Halloween iteration, and was a hit with critics, who saw it as simultaneously a send-up and reinvention of the genre, particularly in the horror genre, and doubly so for a critical and financial success like Scream. Scream 2 came out the very next year and was another huge success. It had a higher budget, but still crossed over that $170 million threshold, and was received well from both critics and fans alike. While the first film was a meta-concept film about slashers, the sequels went the same route when discussing the glut of slasher sequels, and even poked fun at the very few sequels that are better than the originals. After two successful films, there was, of course, a third.
I want to thank you guys for watching The Black Sheep, and ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now. Like this video and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now back to the show.
Craven wasn't really known for taking the reins on sequels to his films. Sure, he did The Hills Have Eyes Part 2, but look at that film. Aside from the hilarity of being the only film I can think of with a dog having a flashback, it's not exactly great. He also did New Nightmare, which is in the top 3 Nightmare films easily, but that was after a huge number of sequels were already produced. The Scream series is firmly his to direct, and Part 4 was the last project he ever did.
And you have to also, in order to live up to the standards of Scream, sort of analyze that decade and come up with something cogent and meaningful to say about it that's original.
One huge thing that was different for Scream 3 from the first two is the writing. Kevin Williamson wrote the first 2 films, and they feel very cohesive together. Williamson stayed on to produce Part 3 with Craven, but handed the writing duties over to Aaron Kruger, who, apart from a very coincidental last name, had only one major screenwriting credit to his name at this point, the very dark but well-made Arlington Road. After Scream 3, Kruger would go on to craft the American Ring films, as well as other 2000s horrors, Lance's favorites, Skeleton Key and Blood and Chocolate, before moving over to Hollywood blockbusters like the Transformers series, Dumbo, and the new Top Gun sequel. Scream 3 isn't a bad movie, but even IMDb buries it under every other entry in the series and the TV show when you go to search it.
Riley, oh my god. Where are you? What's happening?
What the fuck is this?
It is a prime candidate for Black Sheep status, as even with its flaws, and there are a few, it's worth a watch, particularly when you are making a run at the whole series. The movie opens with that same direct jump into an ongoing story that the first 2 films had. This time it's with series regular Cotton Weary, played by Liev Schreiber. Now, it's cool to see what he has done with his life since the last film, but the problem with this scene is that after the first 2 films, you know he's dead. Drew Barrymore, Omar Epps, and Jada Pinkett Smith are the first characters we see in the first 2 films, and they are the first characters to die. Kudos to the film for offing what could have been a main character so early, but man, he could have been such a fun addition to the rest of the main cast. The killer seeks him out to find out what happened to Sydney, who has isolated herself and become a crisis counselor, before the film cuts. I promise I'll make a stab at not doing too many puns here. To Courtney Cox's Gail Weathers giving a speech to a college class. A detective informs her of Cotton's death and asks for help in finding Sydney, as a picture of her mother was left at the crime scene. Gail heads with Officer McDreamy. I'm sure there's a huge crossover viewership of Grey's Anatomy in this channel. To the studio where Stab 3 is being filmed. Cotton had a cameo in the film, and it's here where we get our very own awesome cameo. Legendary Roger Corman shows up as a studio exec talking about how bad press is something they don't want, which is one of the great meta jokes I've ever heard, And we also get introduced to everyone's second favorite Lance as an old school horror director helping with the movie's production. Gail and her awful haircut.
What the fuck is this?
Definitely the scariest part of the movie. Run into Officer Dewey, who is helping support the movie as a technical advisor and showing Parker Posey how to be a more accurately awful Gail. David Arquette's the MVP of this movie. Dewey, while being fairly inept, is the one you root for the most and seems to be the only member of the returning cast not just mailing it in. Props for the consistency too, as Dewey has been inept in all of the films to date. While this is going on, Sydney has one of the poorer subplots of the film with the Dream Mother. I get that she would have conflicted feelings about her mom and her actions, but the series has always tried to stay somewhat grounded with real people doing the killings and being smart about it. Adding in any form of haunting or supernatural content feels kinda wrong. Sarah Darling, here played by Jenny McCarthy, becomes the first victim on the studio lot as she is supposed to meet the director at a fitting, but instead is met and killed by this movie's Ghostface. The production is shut down and the killer has found Sydney and begun calling her using the now advanced voice box. The remaining cast meets at a house to mourn their roles when a bodyguard, played by Patrick Warburton, is stabbed and the house is blown up with another cast member inside. If you've seen the movie, then you know I'm skipping over some parts, but this movie is an hour and 56 minutes and really didn't need to be more than 90 to get across the point. Dewey actually does something productive and unloads his gun into the Ghostface killer before he rolls away. The remaining cast is obviously terrified, and the cops are no closer to solving the mystery, even with Dewey discovering that the pictures of Sydney's mom left at the murder scenes all were taken at the very studio the crimes are happening at. Dewey calls Sid, but she shows up of her own volition before he finishes his voicemail. Out of nowhere, Randy's sister shows up to drop off a tape for them to watch. I get it. Randy was a fan favorite from the first two movies. Hell, he was my favorite part of the first two movies. But this just seems forced and even lessens the impact of his surprise death from part 2. The two Gales do some digging with legally distinct, non-copyright infringing Carrie Fisher, another one of the great cameos and moments from the movie, and discovers that Sydney's mom made movies with the very same producer who was working on Stab 3 many years ago. The rest of the cast ends up at a birthday party for the director Roman at the producer's house where they all get picked off one by one. None of the characters, apart from Parker Posey's Gale clone, were really given much time to breathe and grow, so there's almost zero impact when they die. About the only thing it does confirm is that they aren't the killer. The movie tries desperately to make it rain MacGuffins on characters to show that maybe, just maybe, they're the killer before finally revealing the truth. So it turns out that director Roman is actually Sydney's half-brother, and he was the one that orchestrated the killings of the first movie when he showed Billy Loomis the tape of his father.
You. This is all because of you.
The director said.
This is incredibly convoluted, and is one of my least favorite things that movies do. You don't always have to tie things together with previous entries, and certainly don't need to retcon the ideas of better and smarter movies. Sydney kills Roman with the help of Dewey before we get a sugary sweet ending of Sydney opening her house and life back up. The trilogy is over and would go quiet for some time before Scream 4. There are quite a few things done well within Scream 3. The cameos are lovingly thought out and add quite a lot to the frankly ludicrous runtime that the film has.
So how can I help you? Or do you want me to tell you who you look like?
The final third of the film, taking place in an old Hollywood mansion, somehow is able to make it work in terms of tension and giving that horror feel. The problems, however, outrank the wins here. The movie, in case I haven't been crystal clear, is too damn long. On top of that, the runtime is filled with characters we don't really care about, and the ones we're supposed to care about aren't played with any heart by the actors other than Arquette's Dewey.
We're gonna go back to the precinct and we're gonna tell Kincaid and Sydney what we found out.
So the news said this was the precinct. Who's this guy Kincaid?
Scream 3 isn't a complete loss, and I can wholeheartedly recommend it when looking at the entire series. It gets a bad rap for a lot of its creative choices, and rightly so with that fairly dumb ending reveal, but it also tries, man. The third movie in a series can be tricky to pull off. You want to keep the elements that work, but also try to surprise the viewer here and there. It's amazing that the series kept going after this, and if you want to see why, while also having a fun time taking apart what could have been, open a beer and enjoy Scream 3, the black sheep of the series. Thank you for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to our JoBlo Horror Videos channel. Tell your friends who like this sort of content and turn on the bell to receive notifications to all our latest videos. We're an independent company and we appreciate all your support.